Hey guys, in this video I'll be trying to answer one question. Who was the most dominant Mr. Olympia champion of all time? Now sure, you could line up the photos and argue over who had the most impressive physique, but that's not really what this is going to be about. I don't care who had the most mass or the most aesthetic lines, I care about dominance. Some champions barely squeaked out wins, while others walked on stage and made it clear that everyone else was fighting for that second place. That's going to be the focus today. How far ahead of the competition were these champions during their entire reign? To organize things clearly, I'll be using a tier-based system based on overall dominance. S plus tiers for champions who were completely untouchable during their time. No close calls, no controversy, just total control. S tiers for those who were still pretty dominant but had one or two questionable wins along the way. A tier includes champions who were great but had at least one very debatable victory. B tiers for guys who had some dominant wins but also a clear gift or controversial decision. And finally, C tiers reserved for champions whose wins felt like they were undeserved, with no real moment of dominance. Now, before we do dive into it, if you guys are interested in high-quality supplements, you can use my code JakeUltimate for Old School Labs, or check out my link in the description down below. With that all being said, if you guys do enjoy these videos, a like and sub would be awesome, and without any further ado, let's get into this video. Starting off this list is Larry Scott, the original Mr. Olympia champion. He won the very first two Olympias in 1965 and 66, setting the standard in the early days of the sport. Known especially for his massive, perfectly peaked arms, Larry had a clean look that made him a fan favorite and one of the most marketable bodybuilders ever. He retired undefeated after his second win, which certainly helps his legacy of dominance. That said, there is some debate about how close the victories really were. Harold Poole placed second to Scott both years, and some have argued that he may have pushed Larry more than people might have remembered. But because this was so long ago, and documentation is pretty limited, especially with few high-quality photos and less formalized judging, it is difficult to say just how close those contests really were. What we can say is that Larry was a clear standout during his era, with a look that captured the imagination of early bodybuilding fans. Still, given the limited level of competition and the uncertainty around how dominant those wins actually were, I think I'm going to place Larry Scott in A tier. He had an era-defining physique with a clean 2-0 record at the Olympia, but outside of his world-class arms, he was not untouchable across the board. His dominance is historically important, no doubt, but it does not quite reach that S-tier level of control that we will see later in this list. Next is Sergio Oliva, often referred to as the Myth, and for good reason. Sergio was one of the most genetically gifted bodybuilders the sport has ever seen, with flaring quads, thick full arms, a minuscule waist, and lats that exploded outward like a cobra hood. His silhouette was really unlike anything the world had ever seen at the time. He won 3 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles from 1967 to 1969, and during those years he definitely asserted his dominance. In 67, he faced a real lineup for the last time during his reign, and still no one was even close. His combination of size, shape, and structure were simply too much. Then in 1968, Sergio won by default, literally because no one showed up to challenge him. But it is important to note that this was not a weak version of Sergio by any means. His physique was still at a very elite level. In 1969, though, he faced a young Arnold Schwarzenegger and beat him. While some argue it was a close call, with Arnold bringing better separation and detail, particularly in the back and legs, Sergio's overall mass proportions and stage presence carried him to victory. In my view, it was a clear win, though it did mark the beginning of a changing of the guard. Overall, Sergio Oliva would land in the S tier though. His reign was short but very dominant, and he beat the best of his generation, including a future legend. The only reason he does not crack into that S+ tier is because of the lack of depth in 68 and the slight debate surrounding 1969. Still, Sergio's look was so far ahead of its time that his dominance cannot be overstated. Moving on, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger, the most iconic name in bodybuilding history. Arnold won 7 Mr. Olympia titles between 1970 and 1975, and again in 1980, and during that stretch he showcased an elite blend of structure, charisma, and posing mastery. His victories in 1973 and 1974 were pretty dominant, with no real challengers coming close. Even 1971, often overlooked, was one of his sharper showings in terms of condition, though the win was practically uncontested due to Sergio Oliva's disqualification. His first Olympia win in 1970 was a narrow one against Sergio, but Arnold came in improved from the previous year, showing more density and better lines. The real controversy starts in 1972, though, where many believe Sergio brought his all-time best package, full, conditioned, and massive, yet Arnold still won with what many argue was a flatter, less impressive version. The result has been debated for decades. In 1975, the famous pumping iron year, Arnold was clearly better than Franco Columbo in the overall category, but some do argue that Serge Nubret was the real standout of the night and got overlooked. Then there's 1980, Arnold's comeback win, which remains to be one of the most controversial decisions in all of Olympia history. He was lean, impressive, and, decent considering that he came back after 5 years, but many felt others like Chris Dickerson, Mike Menser, or just, Boyer Coe as well, might have been more deserving of that win. Even fans who think Arnold deserved to win admit that politics were likely a factor. All of that considered, I think he would land in A tier. He had a few dominant performances, but his reign was also filled with a lot of close calls and controversial decisions. His status as a legend is unquestionable, but in terms of pure dominance on the Olympia stage, he falls just short of the S tier levels. Now let's talk about Franco Columbo, a 2-time Mr. Olympia winner. Franco is known for his thick, compact physique, incredible strength as well, and he often outmuscled competitors with his density and rugged condition, despite being one of the shorter competitors. He won the Olympia in 1976 and again in 1981, but both of these victories came with some serious asterisks. In 1976, Franco won the under 200-pound class in a very debatable decision over Frank Zayn. Zayn brought much better proportion, symmetry, and overall flow, while Franco was denser and more muscular. Franco then went on to beat Ken Waller for the overall fairly easily, but that lightweight class was where the real drama was. While it was not the worst call of all time, it was far from a clean, dominant win. Then came 1981, one of the most controversial moments in Olympia history. After a 5-year break and a serious injury in the legs, Franco returned and was awarded the title over much sharper, more complete physiques like Tom Platz, Danny Padilla, and Roy Callender. Almost nobody thought Franco deserved that win, and to many it felt like a political move, a reward for past loyalty and name value rather than what was actually on stage that night. Because of how tainted both of his wins were, I would say that Franco would land in C tier. As a person and a figure in bodybuilding, he is an absolute legend, but in terms of dominance on the Olympia stage, I think his victories lacked clarity, and the 1981 result completely undermines even the benefit of the doubt from 1976. Now let's move on to Frank Zayn, the king of aesthetics and the face of the lightweight era in bodybuilding. Zayn won the Mr. Olympia 3 times from 1977 to 79, and while he never had the most mass, he brought such an elite combination of size, shape, condition, and symmetry that it completely changed the judging standards of the time. His win in 1977 came in a highly anticipated showdown with Robbie Robinson, who many thought would dominate. But while Robbie had the bigger arms and a more muscular frame, Zayn's proportions, vacuum, and presentation were simply cleaner and more refined. His victory that year was close, but deserved. In 1978, Zayn came back sharper and more conditioned, and he needed to be. The lineup was deeper with names like Roy Callender, a much-improved Robbie Robinson returning, and many others. Zayn brought even better detail and improved size in the right areas, especially in the back and arms. Zayn ended up winning, and this win over Robinson was again well earned and not nearly as controversial as some people think. Then in 1979, Zayn faced his toughest challenge yet, a young and massive Mike Menser. Many thought Menser's size and fullness might signal the end of Zayn's reign, but Zayn came in peeled and stage ready, while Menser kind of smoothed out between prejudging and finals. It was a classic apples to oranges decision, but Zayn's presentation and razor-sharp condition once again carried him to victory. Overall, I would say that Frank Zayn would land in S tier. He never truly blew away the field in the way some mass monsters did, but his wins were consistent, well-earned, and set a new benchmark for aesthetics in the sport. He faced strong competition each year, and always came back better and on top, with poise and precision. Zayn may not have been the most overwhelming competitor on stage, but he was truly undeniably dominant in his own way. Next up is Chris Dickerson, the 1982 Mr. Olympia champion. Dickerson was a seasoned veteran by the time he finally captured that Mr. Olympia title, and his physique was always known for clean lines, good proportions, and pretty polished presentation. But when it comes to dominance, his win stands out more for the timing than for the performance itself. The 1982 Olympia was held in London and featured a fairly stacked lineup, including Frank Zayn, Casey Viator, Samir Benu, Albert Beckles, and Tom Platz. However, there were major circumstances affecting the outcome. Mike Menser was absent, Zayn was aging and coming back from injury, and Tom Platz competed just a few weeks after tearing his bicep. Dickerson showed up in great shape and delivered a very strong routine, but he was not the clear standout in terms of muscle density or stage presence. His victory was more so about consistency and professionalism than really anything else. With that all in mind, I would say that Chris Dickerson falls into a respectable B tier. He earned his win, but it came in a weakened field, and his physique, while respectable, never truly set a standard. It was a solid moment for a consistent competitor, but not one that truly reflects elite dominance at the Olympia level. Up next is Samir Benu, the 1983 Mr. Olympia champion, and in my own opinion, the most perfectly balanced golden era physique ever. Nicknamed the Lion of Lebanon, Samir combined flawless symmetry, full muscle bellies, textbook proportions, and very clean detail. His lone Olympia win came during a sort of transitional period with no clear favorite in the lineup, but he took full advantage of that moment and delivered a version of his physique that left no doubt. Leading up to 1983, Samir had struggled with water retention and sort of inconsistent showings. But after cracking the top 4 in 1982 and finally figuring out his peak, he came into the Munich stage with a look that was polished from head to toe. At just, I think, 188 pounds, he appeared far larger thanks to his structure and fullness. His most impressive pose, the rear double, showcased one of the best backs in all of Olympia history, complete with the first ever truly recognized Christmas tree. He faced stiff competition from Mohamed Makaway and a young Lee Haney, but none of them matched Samir's total package in terms of shape, condition, and presentation. Despite only winning one title, Samir Benu is going into that S+ tier without any question. That 1983 physique was truly undeniable, a true masterclass in aesthetic bodybuilding. He had no weak points relative to his era, dominated the stage visually, and did it cleanly without any controversy. In a year with no reigning champion, Samir claimed the crown decisively in my opinion, and delivered a version of the Olympia-winning physique that many still consider to be the most complete of all time. Now we get to Lee Haney, one of the most dominant forces the Olympia stage has ever seen. Haney won 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles from 84 to 91, a record that stood untouched until Ronnie Coleman. His combination of size, structure, aesthetics, and condition were unprecedented for the time, and he still remains as a golden era standard. Standing tall with wide clavicles, a small waist, and thick muscle everywhere, Haney managed to walk the line between mass monster and classic champion in a way few have since. Throughout his reign, Haney was rarely threatened. From 1984 through 89, no one came close. He routinely dwarfed his competition while still maintaining that shape and balance. The only time his crown was truly in question was in 1990, the year the Olympia was drug-tested. Haney came in noticeably downsized, and Lee Labrada pushed him hard with a more aesthetic, tighter look. Still, Haney's structure and muscle density were enough to win. Then came 1991, when a young and hungry Dorian Yates emerged as a real challenger. But even then, Haney held his ground. His physique had more fullness, width, and flow, and he closed out his career with a decisive 8th title before retiring on top, something almost no other champion has done. Lee Haney, in my opinion, is without question S+ tier. He dominated his era like no one else, and with only one close call and no real defeats, he evolved the standard for size and shape, maintained a long and very consistent reign, and exited the sport on top. You could easily make the case that Haney is the most dominant Mr. Olympia ever, and honestly, you would not be wrong. Moving on to Dorian Yates, the 6-time Mr. Olympia champion from 1992 to 1997, and the man who ushered in the true mass monster era. Dorian's physique was truly unlike anything that came before him: granite-hard condition, unmatched back development, and a work ethic that became legendary. While his shape was never the most pleasing, his ability to overwhelm competitors with density and detail made him nearly impossible to ignore when he was on. Dorian had some truly dominant wins, especially 1993 as well as 1995. In those years, he was untouchable, massive, dry, and very complete. His back, particularly in the rear double and rear lat spread, was arguably the best in history, but not every win came without question. In 1992, his debut win, Kevin Levrone pushed him extremely hard, especially from the front, but Dorian's back and overall maturity gave him the upper hand. 1994 was a different story though. Shawn Rhoden was polished and very aesthetic at prejudging, while Dorian came in looking off and bloated and really not himself. He did improve a lot by finals, but still, many argue that Rhoden deserved the win. In 1996, again, Rhoden gave him a run for his money, but Dorian was solid enough to hold on. Then there's 1997, one of the most controversial Olympia decisions ever. Dorian came in with a torn bicep, that torn tricep, just a terrible set of arms, and was clearly off in the midsection. And while Nasser El-Sambadi was full, hard, and complete, who took second place, Dorian still had that superior back and the condition, which eventually gave him the win. Because of all that, I would say that Dorian Yates lands in A tier. At his best, he was absolutely dominant, no one matched his condition or sheer density, but he also had multiple close calls and at least one win that many view as a robbery. He was consistent, incredibly driven, and a clear force in the sport, just not always unchallenged. Now let's talk about Ronnie Coleman, the 8-time Mr. Olympia champion, and widely considered the greatest bodybuilder to ever do it. Ronnie's peak years, especially 1998, 99, 2003, and 2004, were some of the most dominant performances we have ever seen. In those years, he was simply untouchable. Whether it was due to his freakish mass, insane condition, or overwhelming presence, or a combination of all of those, nobody really came close. His 2003 look in particular was almost cartoonish. 287 pounds on stage, with strided glutes and really strided everything. He made world-class competitors like Jay Cutler look small. However, not every year was that dominant. In 2000, his waist was a problem, distended and hard to control, but when he did flex it, it looked tight enough, and the rest of his physique was too overwhelming to deny. 2001 was a close battle between him and Jay Cutler. Ronnie was a bit sick leading into the show and came in with a bloated midsection. Jay looked fresh, aesthetic, and arguably more complete frontally, but still Ronnie had better hamstrings, glutes, and a superior back. Once he dried out, he did pull ahead, but it remains to be one of the most debated Olympias ever. Then there's 2002, widely seen as Ronnie's weakest win by far. He was downsized and clearly flat, yet still won. Kevin Levrone, who took second, was also far from his best. Many argue that Gunter Schlierkamp, who was full, conditioned, and very complete, should have won that show. It was unquestionably a decision that dents Ronnie's, record of dominance. And then you have 2005, where Ronnie faced a rapidly improving Jay Cutler and was beginning to show signs of wear and tear, with visible atrophy in the lats, triceps, and legs. He still won, but barely. Taking all of that into account, I would have to say that Ronnie lands in S tier. At his peak, no one was more dominant in all of history. He had some of the most insane packages ever presented in bodybuilding, but the few close calls, one or two controversial wins, and the slight decline in his later years keeps him just below that S+ tier, where total dominance without question belongs. Still, Ronnie's reign was one of the most impressive in the entire history of the sport. Next is Jay Cutler, a four-time Mr. Olympia winner and one of the most popular champions of the 2000s. Jay's physique was all about width, massive delts, sweeping quads, and an overall very thick, imposing frame that could stand toe-to-toe with Ronnie Coleman at his best. His most dominant win came in 2009 when he came back from losing the title in '08 and shut down the entire field with arguably his best ever look. Full, dry, detailed, and very confident, it is still one of the most memorable wins in Olympia history. Outside of 2009, though, Jay's wins were much more debatable. In 2006, he finally defeated Ronnie Coleman after years of being runner-up. While it was a close call, Jay was the fresher, more complete bodybuilder, and Ronnie was clearly aging and dealing with injuries. That win was deserved, but 2007 was a completely different story. Victor Martinez came in sharp, more aesthetic, and with a much better flow in my own opinion, while Jay was flat, soft, blocky, and off in a lot of areas. Many fans and experts consider this to be one of the biggest robberies of all time. In 2008, Jay was punished for showing up similarly and lost the title to Dexter Jackson. In 2010, Jay took the title for the last time, but it was far from dominant. Heath pushed him extremely hard and brought a look that was nearly identical to his 2011 Olympia winning package. Jay's waist was noticeably wider by this point, and his lower back had started to lose a lot of that detail. He still won, but it was close, and many believe Phil should have taken it. Because of, his up and down record, I would say that Jay Cutler belongs in B tier. He had one of the greatest wins of all time in 2009, and was clearly deserving in 2006, but his other two victories were highly debatable, and his condition and shape varied a lot throughout his reign. Jay is a legend, no doubt, regardless of the outcomes, but in terms of pure dominance, his record is definitely mixed. Up next is Dexter Jackson, the 2008 Mr. Olympia winner, and one of the most consistent competitors in all of bodybuilding. Known for his razor-sharp condition, symmetry, and polish, Dexter came into the '08 Olympia looking very sharp, streamlined, and professional. He brought excellent detail, especially in the midsection, legs, and back, and he nailed his posing and presentation. But while it was a clean win, it's hard to argue that it was a dominant one. The reality is that Jay Cutler, the reigning champion at the time, was still off. Not nearly as bad as 2007, but also not nearly his best. He was flat from the back and lacked the refinement that Dexter brought. He also had a wider midsection, and although he carried a lot of size and was also pretty decently conditioned frontally, he still didn't look at his best. Meanwhile, Heath made his Olympia debut that year, and arguably could have won it all. He brought incredible fullness, sharp lines, and stood out as a future champion even then. Some believe he was just as conditioned as Dexter, but with better pop and more impressive shape. Still, it was likely too soon for the IFBB to crown him as the Mr. Olympia champion considering it was his debut, and Dexter had that veteran presence and a pretty clean look overall. Because of that, Dexter Jackson would land in B tier. He definitely earned his win. This was no gift by any means, but it came in a year where the reigning champion was significantly off the mark, and a rising star was held back by inexperience. Dexter beat Jay decisively in terms of refinement and stage control, but he did not dominate the entire lineup in a way that puts him in, that A tier or S tier category. He was still the best man on that stage, but not really by a wide margin. Now let's take a look at Heath, the 7-time Mr. Olympia champion, and one of the most genetically gifted bodybuilders the sport has ever seen. Phil combined razor-sharp condition with 3D roundness, incredible detail, and arguably one of the best backs of all time. His most dominant wins came in 2011 and 2013. In 2011, he clearly outclassed Jay Cutler, who was showing significant signs of age and dealing with a visible bicep tear. And in 2013, Phil was so dominant that he only needed a single call-out at prejudging. That year might have been the most textbook example of what modern bodybuilding judges look for: fullness, separation, and almost zero flaws. 2015 and 2016 were also underrated wins. In both years, he faced strong challengers, Dexter Jackson in 2015 and Shawn Rhoden in 2016, but Phil's completeness, especially from the back and in the legs, gave him the edge in both years. While he had some midsection issues beginning to creep in, they were definitely not enough to overturn his overall dominance. 2012 was closer though than people remember, with Kai Green pushing him extremely hard, but Phil did have sharper condition and better overall balance. It was close but deserved. The real controversy though comes in 2014, when Phil once again faced Kai Green. That year, his midsection was bloated and very hard to ignore, and while Kai Green was tighter and more balanced frontally, many people do consider this to be a robbery, and it's arguably the one year where Phil probably should have lost. In 2017, his gut issues did get pretty bad, but his back, legs, and overall condition were still very elite. Big Ramy was a real threat, but lacked the detail and completeness that Phil had, which allowed Phil to hang on for one more win. With all that considered, Phil Heath lands in A tier. He had several very dominant wins, especially 2011 and 2013, and consistently brought a world-class physique. While his midsection held him back in later years, and 2014 remains highly debatable, most of his victories were deserved, and the only real one, that crosses into that controversial territory was 2014. Phil was never completely unbeatable, but he was definitely in control for most of, if not all of his reign. Next up is Shawn Rhoden, the 2018 Mr. Olympia winner, and the man who ended Phil Heath's 7-year reign. Rhoden brought a clean, aesthetic physique with very tight lines, great proportions, and standout presentation. His win was not dominant in the traditional sense. Phil was still bigger, especially from behind and from the side, but Rhoden capitalized where it mattered: balance, condition, and midsection control. Phil's gut in 2018 was the worst it had ever been up until that point, and while his muscle density and structure were very impressive, the distension in the waist seriously hurt his flow. Rhoden, on the other hand, looked refined and very composed, with a tight waist and no glaring weaknesses. Sure, he did have weaker triceps and was on the flatter side, but still nothing on the same level as, Phil Heath's big bubble gut. While some fans still do debate this outcome, many now see the judge's decision as the right one, not because Shawn blew Phil away, but because he represented a return to aesthetic standards. He simply presented the better overall package that night. Unfortunately, Rhoden never got the chance to defend his title due to legal issues and his eventual untimely passing, which makes it hard to judge how dominant his reign could have been. Because of that, I would say that Shawn Rhoden falls into B tier. He had a well-earned win, but it was close and he never had the opportunity to establish a sustained dominance. A beautiful physique, no doubt, but not an era-defining champion in the traditional sense. Now we have Brandon Curry, the 2019 Mr. Olympia champion. Brandon is known for his flowing structure, wide back, and very polished overall presentation. He brought a strong V-taper and impressive front shots that carried him through many matchups, but his win here came during one of the weakest lineups in recent Olympia history. With Phil Heath, Shawn Rhoden, Big Ramy, and Kai Green all absent, Brandon's road to the title was far more open than most. Many people felt that William Bonac pushed him pretty hard this year and arguably should have won. Bonac had pretty good condition, especially from behind, and more detail, especially in the legs, while Brandon's lower body lagged in both size and definition. In the upper body, from the front and back, Brandon had excellent shape, but his condition, especially in the legs as I mentioned, did not scream Mr. Olympia level. It was not a controversial win in the traditional sense, but more of a victory by default, where no one truly stepped up to challenge him outright. Because of that, and I hate to do this, I think Brandon Curry lands in C tier. His win was clean and respectable, but it lacked the overwhelming dominance or impact that you would expect from an Olympia champion. He had the structure and the look, but not the complete physique, and he won largely because the lineup around him was extremely underwhelming. A solid champion, but not really a defining one. Now let's talk about Big Ramy, the two-time Mr. Olympia winner in 2020 and 2021. Ramy had long been seen as a mass monster with tons of potential, but inconsistent condition, until 2020 when he finally nailed it. He came in dry, full, and a lot tighter than ever before, and once that happened, nobody in the lineup could match his sheer size, combined with solid enough condition. It was a big moment, not just for Ramy, but for the fans who had waited years to see him peak. In that sense, 2020 was a fairly dominant win. That said, the competition that year was not particularly deep. Heath was making a comeback and brought good fullness, but obviously had midsection issues and was considerably downsized in certain areas. Hottie was incredibly conditioned and arguably should have placed higher, and then you had Brandon Curry, the defending champion, who brought a solid look but lacked lower body detail. Ramy's mass carried him easily, but even at his best, I don't think this version would have won against a prime Heath, and maybe not even Phil's 2017 version. In 2021, Ramy retained the title, but the package he brought was a bit underwhelming. He was softer than 2020, and his condition regressed. Still, no one in the lineup brought enough firepower to truly take him out. Brandon Curry looked good from the waist up, but was still lacking in the legs. Hottie was again arguably the most conditioned man on stage, but not nearly big enough to sway the judges. So Ramy's win, while deserved, felt more like a case of default than dominance. With all of that being considered, I would say that Big Ramy lands in B tier. His 2020 look was a big step forward, and it was definitely well earned, but his reign was short and his conditioning was inconsistent, and the level of competition was also relatively low. He had all the tools, but not the legacy of a true dominance across multiple years. Next is Hottie, the 2022 Mr. Olympia champion and one of the most consistently conditioned bodybuilders of the modern era. Hottie's win in 2022 was well earned. He brought dense, grainy muscle, near flawless condition, and excellent balance from every angle. Among a lineup of top-tier names, he was the most complete bodybuilder on stage that night. But while it was a solid win, it was not truly dominant. He beat out Derek Lunsford, who was making his debut in open class, and still lacked a lot of size and detail. Nick Walker was another top contender who placed third, who many also believed could have won, especially given his sharp condition and crazy density, yet like I said, he placed in third place. Hottie was most definitely the, most polished and stage-ready overall, but the margin between him and the closest challengers was not massive. It was a deserved win, but not one that left everyone in awe. What's also worth noting is that Hottie's 2022 look, while excellent, was not his all-time best in my own opinion. Many argue that his 2024 Arnold Classic showing was far more impressive in terms of presence and visual impact, or even something like his 2019 Vancouver Pro. Still, he managed to bring just enough of everything to beat a pretty stacked lineup, and his victory gave hope that he could still climb back to the top again. All things considered, I would have Hottie earning a spot in A tier. His win was clean and very much well-deserved, with no glaring controversy, but it was not a blowout. He was the best man on stage, just not by a mile. A strong champion with even greater potential, and I hope that he can one day reclaim that title. Now we come to Derek Lunsford, the 2023 Mr. Olympia champion, and former 212 standout who made history by becoming the first to win in both divisions. While Derek's win was groundbreaking, it was also highly controversial. His back poses were undeniably the best in the world, wide, dense, and detailed, but the rest of his physique left a lot of questions. From the front, Derek had visible flaws, underdeveloped legs, softer arms, a flat chest, and noticeable lumps in the lats. While his shape and flow were solid, the physique lacked the completeness you would expect from a Mr. Olympia winner. Hottie, although not at his absolute best, brought sharper condition, more detail from the front, and clearly only lost the back poses. Many felt that Hottie deserved the nod, and even Samson had a case to win based on his density and overall shape. Then in 2024, Derek lost the title to Samson, taking third place, and while he did bounce back at the 2025 Arnold with a pretty convincing win, it still left his reign feeling a bit unstable. His brief time as Mr. Olympia lacked consistency, and his 2023 win, while pretty historic, was definitely not dominant. For those reasons, Derek Lunsford lands in C tier for now. He had a breakout moment, but never fully proved himself as the clear best in the world. The controversy surrounding his win and the quick loss of the title the following year show that he was never truly in firm control of the division, though he still has potential to climb back to the top. Finally, we have Samson Dauda, the 2024 and current Mr. Olympia champion, and one of the most promising physiques of the modern era. Samson brought a truly complete look to the stage, combining mass, aesthetic, structure, and stage presence like no one else in the lineup. His win over Hottie and Derek Lunsford was not a robbery or a fluke, it was a deserving victory against two former champions in one of the most competitive Olympias in recent times. While Hottie and Derek brought their usual strengths, Hottie with razor-sharp condition and Derek with unmatched back detail, Samson stood out with his overwhelming size and great symmetry. He was not far off condition either, especially considering his past showings. His front shots were incredibly dominant, and his balance from top to bottom made him the most complete on stage. That said, his 2025 season has been a bit more inconsistent. He lost the Arnold Classic to Derek, which raises questions about his long-term dominance. Conditioning still remains to be one of the major factors that he must nail consistently. Even so, I would have Samson Dauda in A tier. His Olympia win was clean, hard-fought, and against a very serious lineup. He may not have established himself as the most dominant yet, but his potential is undeniable. If he ever nails his condition fully, he might become the defining champion of this decade. Time will only tell. Well guys, that about does it for this video. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with any of the rankings and why. With that all being said, I do hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.